So in this video we are going to be continuing to take a look at a scenario where civilization starts over. We are now on episode 47 of the series, and in the last episode we saw the Cold War continue to ramp up as Egypt became one of the major players. They officially entered in after they developed their first nuclear bombs. They then went along with this by invading a weak little country, and that got the USB and India both mad. And now all three of these guys are throwing hands with each other. And we also saw a few more events relating to decolonization. But if you do end up enjoying this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. And let's actually get into this video. There are a few things I want to talk about, but first we will be looking at this war over here. I set this war up at the end of the last episode, and that is exactly what we're going to be looking at now. So, in response to India bringing sanctions on to Egypt, because, well, these two are now like enemies with each other, the Egyptians decided to fund a rebel group in this Gujarat lime mint country. Basically, this country used to be a puppet state of India, but after World War II, this was released when India joined the Council of Nations, because if you're in the Council of Nations, you probably shouldn't have a puppet state. It's kind of like advised. It's like part of the human rights thing. So India decided to release this puppet state, but they still gave it an extremely pro-Indian government. The only thing is, the people of this country absolutely hate India. They see the Indians as their like main oppressors. You know, they used to stretch like all the way down here. This is where they used to exist, but they've been pushed all the way up here. They really hate the Indians. So with a little bit of Egyptian money and guns, they started a rebellion, and we are going to be continuing on with this rebellion. That's kind of just a recap of what this was. So anyway, let's continue. So at the end of the episode, the Indians actually invaded into this country to intervene in the civil war, and that's what we see happening here. They already managed to capture the two border major cities, but now they will be continuing to advance in. At this point, the rebel group has taken control of pretty much all of the northern area of the country, and it's at this point where these two forces are now starting to clash with India. The Indians begin to move into their territory. However, with this land over here actually agreeing to join up with the rebels, the Indian forces are actually caught off guard as we see a bunch of Gujarat forces move into this area, even reaching up with the Indian border. This is actually going to cause the Indians to blitz the remainder of the original government, which allows them to take the capital. So yeah, just like that. And they do this so they can fully focus on this front line over here as well, and they managed to make a pretty large amount of progress. Another thing that they attempt to do is cut this country in half by moving up the Indus River. They do pretty decently, however this territory is very much assimilated by the rebel group. This is kind of where they started out in, so they do see some struggles. And we also see the green team now push into some of this other Indian occupied land. The Indians will move across the border, and they are allowed, they kind of force this yellow country to allow them to put some troops down this river and kind of move them on boats. It's a very weird operation, but either way, they manage to further push into the green team. And it's at this point where the rebellion basically just becomes the country, so I'm going to be colouring it back as the original colour. So the Indians are now going to continue their invasion, however they are pushed back on the Indus River. However, at this point, the Egyptians are continuing to ramp up heavy support and aid for this country. However, one thing that they are struggling with is an issue with the Somalian country. The Somalians don't really like how the fact that their strait is being used to transport Egyptian military vessels to supply this team. So the Somalians are going to start to sanction the Egyptian ships moving through. They have to pay a lot of money to get through this area, and the Egyptians are absolutely going to hate this, and this is going to cause something later on in the series. But right now, the Egyptians are just going to pay the tax and keep on going with the civil war. Speaking of the war, the Mint team is actually able to get right on the outskirts of the capital. The reason that they are able to do this, even against a really strong country like India, is just the ridiculous amount of people fighting. Over 70% of the adult male population are fighting in this war. So yeah, a lot of manpower going into this, and then of course Egypt funding them. But one thing we begin to see is in the eastern kind of less rebellious portions, the Indians managed to see a lot of success, and in the western portions we actually see the Mint team see some success. It's kind of just like really split down the middle here, but one thing to note, none of the people in this country really like India, so It's kind of just India managed to do better in this area because it's less rowdy. However, the Indians will be able to successfully capture this one major city right here. However, it's actually going to be at this point where the Council of Nations is going to be getting involved in this situation. I have not talked about the Council of Nations in this war yet, but the Mint country, they are in the Council of Nations, and the Council of Nations has been looking at this situation. They did state that they would be coming up with a solution to this crisis, and they have just made one up. And they are going to be presenting this to both Egypt and India. And basically, what it's going to be is that India is kind of going to be pushed back a little bit because technically India was still puppeting this country. Basically, the Council of Nations decides to set up a brand new, like clean slate government in this country, and allow them to decide whether they want to pursue friendly relations with India or not. They state that India's interference with the government was wrong and goes against the ideals of the Council of Nations. However, because India has still had to go into war here, they will be kind of granting some reparations to India. Basically, India will be allowed to take some land from this country, and in turn of that, there will be a new government established here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this peace treaty. So this is what we see in this peace treaty right here. The Indians are going to be given this portion of land right here. This land was regulated by the Council of Nations to be given over. And this new government that is set up in here is quite suspiciously going to be extremely pro-Egyptian. I'm sure the remaining Egyptian forces that were fighting over here to help out these guys, they definitely didn't have anything to do with this. I'm sure this was their own free will. But they have a new government that really does not like India and likes Egypt. Basically, the rebellion government just takes over this country. That was probably foreseen. But yeah, that is what we see there. Next up, continuing on with the Cold War stuff, we're going to be taking a look at the nuclear bombs layer once more. I did focus on this quite a lot in the last episode because Egypt, well, they developed their first nuclear bomb. They even nuked the red country that was down here when they invaded them. But we're going to be looking at it again, as these three countries are going to be continuing to ramp up their nuclear production. First of all, India goes from 12 nuclear bombs all the way up to 19. This is a pretty big jump. India, by far, still has the largest nuclear arsenal, and they are really putting a lot of work into this. The Egyptians are going to go from 1 nuclear bomb all the way up to 5. Egypt is kind of rushing the development of these bombs, quite similar to what the USB did in the first stages. So the Egyptian bombs are nowhere near as powerful as the Indian bombs or the USB's bombs. But speaking of the USB goes from 3 nuclear bombs up to 9, so almost double digits there. But like I did say before, these three, once again, are not the only countries attempting to develop nuclear bombs, and we will be seeing more countries develop them later on, but who those countries are will remain a mystery for now. But next up, we will be seeing an extremely important event take place that is going to be further expanding the frontiers of the Cold War. And this event is actually going to be so big that we're even going to see another country become kind of one of the leading players in the Cold War. And this event is going to be happening up here in Manchuria. So if we take a look at the stability layer, we can see that Manchuria is the red stability. This signifies that they are very unstable, and there is a lot of civil unrest in this country, and they're even on the brink of collapse. This country is very ethnically diverse. It has a lot of political issues. It's also a dictatorship, so it's kind of like a weird system of government. But what we see happening is the Manchurian country turning from a red stability to a dark red stability. This signifies that they are now actively collapsing. And we see this brand new green group pop up over here. This culture, or this kind of region, more so aligns with like the really East Asian countries like Sakhalin, Korea, and even Tokyo. I wonder if that has any correlation. But anyway, this group is going to pop up in the eastern portion of the country. The remaining government is going to send a cry out to help for anyone who can help them. Now, these guys, if we take a look, they are not in the Council of Nations. However, there is one country that is actually, they have fairly good relations with this country, and that country is going to start to supply this country and even attempt to fully save this country, and that country is going to be none other than India. The Indians actually have quite a lot of influence over the Manchurian country, But the Indians, they are pretty friendly with this country, and it's actually like their zone of influence is in this country, which maybe someone didn't like. But either way, they will be supplying the Manchurian country as they hope to keep this ally and point of influence in this kind of further regions of their reaches. However, one thing about this rebellion, it's like suspiciously strong, and it doesn't take too long for India to figure out that this rebellion is absolutely being funded by a foreign power, as it's just extremely strong. It's able to even capture this major city right here, which puts their capital in danger. This basically just makes India go like, oh yeah, we're going fully in now. They start sending over their like full-on military to help them out. And with their military here, they begin to set up some bases that they kind of try and infiltrate transmissions coming into this rebellion as they attempt to figure out which country is actually funding these guys. And in this northern city up here, we actually have a transmission coming into it, and the Indians are able to actually tap the communications of this transmission, and they find out that the country that is supporting this rebellion and is actively doing it in order to kick India's influence out of this region is going to be none other than Tokyo. Tokyo really does not like the fact that India has a kind of ally or point of influence in their region, and well, this is their attempt to basically kick them out of this region. And yeah, the Indians, they find out about this, they're going to go over to Tokyo and they're going to be like, what the actual hell is this? Can you like not do this, please? And with India finding out about this, they're going to go over to Tokyo, and basically they're just going to be threatening Tokyo. And Tokyo, they do not like this. How is Tokyo going to be responding to this? Well, we'll see. We'll see soon. But Tokyo is going to think of a response to this. But in the meantime, these two guys now actively realize it, like that they're fighting each other. Like, literally, it's that Tokyo isn't even trying to hide it. There's Japanese people literally fighting on this front line, and if that doesn't raise some alarm bells, I don't know what does. But yeah, these two guys now know that they're going after each other, and it's a whole mess. The Council of Nations, they are pretty good at solving kind of small little regional things, but when it comes to disputes between the leading members, you can't really do much about that. But this rebellion is going to continue to spread on, and it starts to become really back and forth. While India is quite a bit stronger than Tokyo, Tokyo is literally right here. They can just straight up send stuff through Korea, who is their ally, whereas for India it's a little bit more complicated. So it's a lot easier for Tokyo to help this rebellion out. But then the Indians are going to do something really stupid. An Indian aircraft carrier is going to leave this city right here, and it's going to be travelling down, and it's going to be travelling through the Strait of Malacca, and then it's going to be travelling through the South China Sea and near to Taiwan, and it's going to be stopping right here in the middle of the Yellow Sea. Now, what is an Indian aircraft carrier doing in the middle of these waters which are controlled by China and Korea? Well, it turns out that one of these planes may or may not have a nice little bomb on them that is capable of wiping out an entire city. Are the Indians doing this as a show of force, or are they like genuinely threatening Tokyo? Tokyo doesn't really know. I mean, they find out pretty quickly that there's a nuclear warship like right near the waters of their allies. Tokyo is going to be like, whoa, 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 this is going way too far. They call on the Council of Nations, and the Council of Nations is like, yeah, if you nuke Tokyo, you're out. This is not on. So India is going to be like, hey, we were not planning on nuking Tokyo. We were just planning on using it to help out our allies and maybe threaten the Green Rebellion. Tokyo has no way of proving that India was planning to nuke them, but let's just say they're probably glad that they found out before India may have had the chance to nuke them. The Indian warship is going to then travel back over to this port city, and with Tokyo kind of feeling a little bit like flustered by this, they are just going to be agreeing to sign a kind of white peace with this country, although these two groups, like, they really hate each other. It's kind of like the Korean War, but I mean, probably the Korean War is probably a good example because dictatorship. But either way, let's go ahead and take a look at this peace treaty. So this is what we see for the peace treaty here. Pretty simple. Basically, this country over here is going to go ahead and get their independence. In terms of ideology, these guys are going to be a flawed democracy, and the dictatorship government does still exist in this country over here. This is the same thing. I just made the colour a little bit darker because it kind of merged too similarly with Tokyo. But anyway, that is what we see there. And very suspiciously, right after this war, if any country still had doubts that Tokyo was not funding the Green Team, this happens. Yeah, so next up, we're actually going to be staying extremely close to Tokyo and the war that just happened, as we're going to be looking at this Siberian region up here. Now, this land still is controlled by Sakhalin, however, ever since losing that war to Tokyo, they are really having some troubles keeping hold of this, so eventually they do just make the hard decision to sell this country over to Siberia. They are in need of some money, so that's kind of helpful for them there. But there is going to be one final event that is going to be heavily affecting the current Cold War system and is going to be turning just a slight rivalry into another player of the Cold War. And, well, what do I mean by this? Well, I mean that Tokyo officially develops a nuclear bomb. This is what Tokyo's response had been to India, and ever since getting threatened, they have been really ramping up their nuclear technology. And just like that, they develop a nuclear bomb. Immediately, India and the USB are going to do the same thing they did with Egypt. Basically, they're just going to be like, no, 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 can we please not do this? At this point, still no other countries actually know that the USB has nuclear bombs, so no one's really calling out the USB for being hypocritical here. But the USB still doesn't like this, so they are going to be saying to Tokyo, hey, we don't really want any issues with you, so just please, like, destroy your nuclear bomb. And Tokyo is going to be infuriated by this. They see this as a massive insult. They had just been threatened nuclearly by India, and that now there's going to be some foreign power that might even have their own nukes that we don't know about coming in and telling us we're not allowed nukes. Yeah, no, no, thank you, buddy. So basically, this unofficially adds Tokyo as another player into the Cold War, but not really. It's only really India and the USB that are currently beefing with Tokyo. Egypt could not care less. In fact, Egypt is probably like go off king to Tokyo. You know, show these big strong countries that you can still do whatever you want to do. That's basically what Egypt has been doing. And yeah, that is going to be the final thing we see. However, maybe relations between Tokyo and Egypt won't stay great forever. However, that is where we're going to be ending off this episode. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like and subscribe. I really tried to put a lot of Cold War stuff into this episode. But anyway, I will see you in the next episode.